Wallace Locksley owned a 200-foot yacht and a corner office on the 31st floor. Ansel Breck mopped that floor for $14.50 an hour, and his 6-year-old daughter sat in a folding chair near the reception desk every night, counting ceiling tiles while he worked. When Wallace invited Ansel to a black-tie gala on the yacht, he brought his daughter and a carved wooden seal named Barnacle. He did not bring his merchant marine certification, his 8 years on container ships, or the fact that he could rig a sea anchor in the dark. He would not need any of that unless something went wrong. Ansel Breck mopped the 31st floor of the Locksley Capitol building the way he had done every weeknight for the past 14 months, left to right, back wall to elevator bank, with a ringing motion at the end of each stroke that he had never thought about and never needed to. It was a bowline twist. His hands had learned it on the deck of a container ship called the Roanoke when he was 23 years old, and they had never unlearned it, even on linoleum, even under fluorescent light, even 60 miles from the nearest dock. Effie sat in a folding chair near the reception desk. She had her crayons and a sheet of printer paper she had pulled from the recycling bin, and she was drawing something that involved a great deal of blue. Barnacle, the small carved wooden seal that fit in her palm, with one flipper glued back on and the rest of him worn smooth from 3 years of handling, poked out of the front pocket of her jacket. Renata had bought the seal at a craft fair in Rockport the summer before she died, and Effie had not been more than arm's reach from it since the afternoon Ansel came home from the sea for good, and found his daughter holding it in both hands in their kitchen in Gloucester, waiting for someone to explain what had happened on Route 128. "Papa," Effie said without looking up, "this building has 42 doors that lock. I counted. That's a lot of doors. Some of them lock twice." Ansel wrung the mop. "Some people like to keep things separate." She considered this. She looked up at the ceiling and began counting tiles. It was what she did. Counted things when the world got too large or too quiet or too unfamiliar. Ceiling tiles, buttons on a coat, waves, seconds between thunder and lightning. She did not know she did it. The rhythm was the thing that steadied her, and it had been that way since she was 4. Ansel checked his phone. The NOAA marine forecast loaded. It loaded every morning before coffee, every evening before bed. Offshore waters, Cape Ann to Nantucket. Small craft advisory in effect after 8 p.m. Saturday. He read it, put the phone in his pocket, and pushed the mop bucket toward the elevator bank. The next morning, Wallace Locksley stepped off the elevator at 9:15 with Desmond Kay, Locksley Capital's general counsel, 3 paces behind him checking his watch. Wallace was scanning the lobby with the loose-shouldered ease of a man who owned the building and most of the people inside it. Ansel was emptying the wastebasket beside the security desk. Wallace stopped. He put a hand on Ansel's shoulder and smiled. "Ansel, Saturday night, I'm taking the Meridian out for a client gala. Simone's put together a whole thing, quartet, catering, the works. I want you there." Ansel did not step back from the hand. He did not look at Desmond, whose face held no expression at all. "Bring that suit you wore to the Christmas party," Wallace said. "The gray one. And bring your little girl. There'll be shrimp." He clapped Ansel's shoulder twice and walked toward the elevator bank. Desmond followed without a word. Ansel stood still for 4 seconds. Then he picked up the wastebasket liner, tied it off, and carried it to the service corridor. Friday evening, the apartment in Gloucester. Ansel ironed his one suit on the kitchen counter. The iron hissed against a scorch mark that had been there since the Christmas party, the only occasion in 14 months that required pressed clothes. The suit was gray and slightly too wide in the shoulders because he had bought it when he was carrying 50-pound mooring lines 12 hours a day, and his body was built for a different life. Effie sat on the counter beside him, feeding pretend fish to Barnacle with the seriousness of a veterinarian. "Will the boat be big?" she asked. "Very big." "Bigger than a whale?" "About the same." She held Barnacle up so the seal could see the suit. "Is it going to be fun?" Ansel checked NOAA on his phone. The small craft advisory was still posted. Seas building to 6 feet after dark. His thumb hovered over the screen. He put the phone down. "I don't know yet," he said. At bedtime, he tucked Barnacle in first, pulled the quilt up to the seal's chin, and then tucked Effie in behind him. "Papa, will the people on the boat be nice?" "I don't know." "I'll bring Barnacle," she said, "in case they're not." He turned off the light and stood in her doorway, listening to her breathing settle. The Meridian sat at the end of the marina dock like something from a different country. 200 feet of white fiberglass and teak, 3 decks lit from inside, music spilling from the upper salon, strings, something classical, something that cost money to play live 12 miles offshore. Ansel counted the lifeboat davits, 2, portside. He estimated the freeboard at about 6 feet, which was less than it should have been for a vessel this size in these conditions. Effie stopped at the gangway and counted the portholes. 14. Ansel adjusted her collar and they boarded. The guests wore evening clothes, charcoal suits with no creases, dresses that caught the deck lighting and did not let go. Petra Colvin, 29, a junior server on the yacht's catering crew, paused near the aft railing with a tray of champagne flutes, looked at Effie and said, "That's a pretty dress." "Thank you," Effie said. "Does the boat have a name? My seal has a name. His name is Barnacle." Petra pointed to the stern. "Right there, Meridian." Effie nodded, satisfied that the boat was properly named, and turned back to Barnacle to relay the information. Ansel's eyes were already elsewhere. He noted the fire station on the bulkhead near the main salon entrance, the emergency equipment locker aft of the wheelhouse, the bridge wing access. Old habit. The way a carpenter walks into a room and sees the joinery. He cataloged everything that could save a life, and no one noticed him doing it. The main salon was crystal and white linen and a string quartet on a mezzanine. 63 guests. Effie had Barnacle in her pocket and a plate with 3 shrimp, and she was sitting at a table near the buffet when Wallace found them. He brought 5 clients in suits that cost more than Ansel made in a month. Simone Vellier, the chief operating officer, 38, the first woman in the C-suite at Loxley Capital, stood at the edge of the group with a glass she had not yet sipped from. "Everyone," Wallace said, "this is Ansel. He keeps our floors clean." He put his hand on Ansel's shoulder again. "I told him he should see how the other half lives." Laughter. Warm, indiscriminate, gone before anyone decided whether they meant it. Ansel did not move. Effie looked up. She looked at the circle of laughing faces, one by one, the way she counted things. She looked at her father's face, which was not laughing. She tugged his sleeve. "Papa? Why are they laughing? You didn't tell a joke." The laughter stopped. Not all at once. It died in a ragged wave, the way sound dies in a room when someone has said the thing that everyone heard but no one expected. Wallace's smile held, but something behind it shifted, the small recalibration of a man who has been observed by the wrong pair of eyes. Simone Vellier lowered her glass. Greta Holm, 61, seated 3 tables away in a linen jacket, the widow of a man who had built ships in Quincy for 40 years, set her untouched drink on the tablecloth and studied Ansel's hands. The calluses. The faded compass rose tattooed on his left forearm. She looked at those hands the way her husband had looked at steel, testing it for what it could carry. Wallace recovered first. He always did. He squeezed Ansel's shoulder and moved the group toward the bar, and the moment closed behind him like water, closing over a stone. Ansel took Effie's hand. She held 2 of his fingers, the way she always did, and walked her out to the forward deck. The wind was sharper here. The swells were longer, the intervals shorter. The wind had backed from southwest to northeast in the last 30 minutes, and the sea state was building against the current. The waves would steepen before they grew. The conditions were deteriorating faster than the forecast had predicted. Anyone who had spent time on open water would have read that pattern the way a doctor reads a pulse. But no one on this boat had spent time on open water. They had spent time on boats. Effie leaned against the railing. Ansel kept his hand flat on her back. "The ocean sounds like it's breathing," she said. "Waves have a rhythm, like counting." "Did you used to count them?" "Every day, for 8 years." "Do you miss it?" He looked at the dark water. Then he looked at his daughter. "I found something better to count." She asked what. He tapped her nose. Behind them, through the glass door to the salon, Simone Vellier stood in a rectangle of warm light. She had come outside to check the deck lighting and had stopped when she saw them, the man in the cheap gray suit kneeling to be at the child's height, the child holding his fingers, the carved seal poking out of her pocket. She stood there for 3 seconds. Then she turned and went back inside without speaking. Ansel's jaw tightened. He picked Effie up and carried her inside. He found the bridge wing. Captain Donald Riggs, 58, master of the Meridian, was inside the wheelhouse reviewing instruments with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He had a weatherfax in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other, and the look of a man who trusted his instruments more than his windows. Ansel knocked on the open door. Riggs looked up and saw the gray suit. "The swell interval has dropped," Ansel said. "Wind back northeast in the last 20 minutes. Sea state is building against the current." Riggs glanced at his displays. Barometer steady. Wind speed within parameters. Nothing alarming yet, if you trusted the numbers. "Appreciate the observation," he said, in the voice people use when they are being polite to someone they do not consider relevant. "Has the VHF been tested tonight?" "It's always operational." Ansel nodded. He left. Riggs watched him go and felt something he could not quite name, an unease that settled into the back of his mind and did not leave. The quartet was playing Dvořák when the Meridian rolled. Not a normal roll, a deep, lateral pitch that sent champagne glasses skating across white linen and stopped the cellist mid-bow. Effie was sitting at her table. Barnacle was propped against a water glass, watching her draw. A second roll, harder. The chandelier swung in a wide arc. A woman screamed. Then the wave hit. It came from the northeast, a rogue swell, 12 feet above the surrounding sea state, a moving wall of black water that was visible through the salon windows for exactly 1/2 second before impact. The Meridian lurched to port so hard the starboard hull lifted. The lights went out. Glass shattered in a cascade that sounded like ice breaking on a river. The emergency lighting kicked in, dim, red, the color of the inside of a closed eyelid. The engines, which had been humming beneath the deck all evening like a second heartbeat, stuttered, coughed, stopped. Silence from below. The kind of silence that machinery leaves behind when it is not sleeping, but dead. Effie was under the table, both hands on Barnacle. Her eyes were wide and dry and counting. The legs of the table, the broken glasses on the carpet, the seconds since the lights went out. 9, 10, 11. Ansel was already there. He had crossed the salon in the dark, navigating overturned chairs and broken crystal by feel, and he was crouched between Effie and the shifting furniture with his body blocking anything that could slide into her. "Count to 10 for me." "1," she whispered. 2, 3, 4. He checked her hands, her arms, no cuts. Barnacle was intact. He pulled her against his chest and held her until she reached 10. On the bridge, Captain Riggs delivered the damage report under red emergency lighting to the group that had gathered there. Wallace, Simone, Desmond, Ansel holding Effie's hand. Main electrical bus, destroyed. Both generators, offline. Navigation, dead. VHF radio, non-functional. It drew power from the main bus. Engines, without power. Rudder, without hydraulics. The Meridian was drifting southeast at approximately 1.5 knots, pushed by wind and current toward Peaked Hill Bar, a shallow reef of sand and rock, 7 nautical miles to the southeast, that had been breaking ships since before the Revolution. Estimated grounding, 90 minutes. Cell service at this distance offshore, non-existent. "Call someone," Wallace said. His voice was tight. The performance was cracking at the edges. "There is nothing to call with," Riggs said. Wallace turned to Simone. "This was your event." Simone did not flinch. She absorbed it the way a bulkhead absorbs a wave, silently, structurally, without moving. Desmond K. cleared his throat. "What about the life rafts?" "In these seas," Riggs said, "the rafts would capsize inside of 3 minutes." Silence. The red light made every face sharp and unfamiliar, as though the dark had peeled something back. Effie looked up at Riggs. She was holding Ansel's hand with one hand and holding Barnacle with the other, and she asked the question with the flat directness of a child who expects adults to tell the truth. "Is the boat going to hit the rocks?" Riggs could not answer her. Ansel set Effie on the navigator's chair. He tucked Barnacle into her lap. He straightened. He turned to Riggs, and when he spoke, his voice was the same volume it had been all evening, the same volume it had been his entire adult life, which was the volume of a man who had never needed to raise it, because he had never said anything that was not worth hearing at the distance it was spoken. "I served 8 years as an able seaman on merchant vessels, container ships and offshore supply boats out of Gloucester and Norfolk. I hold a valid STCW certificate." He paused, not for effect, because the next sentence was the one that mattered. "We can stabilize the drift with an improvised sea anchor built from canvas and chain, and we can get the VHF operational if the 12-volt emergency battery is intact." Riggs stared at him. The captain's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds: disbelief, calculation, and something that might have been relief if it had lasted long enough to name. "You're the janitor," Wallace said. Ansel did not look at Wallace. He looked at Riggs. "Is the 12-volt intact?" Riggs moved to the emergency panel. He opened the cover. The green indicator light on the 12-volt backup battery glowed in the red dark like a single steady eye. "It's intact." From the doorway, Greta Holmes spoke. She had come to the bridge without anyone noticing, the way old women move through a crisis, quietly, with purpose, toward the person who knows what to do. "Let him work." Simone Vellier stepped forward. Her posture had changed. The institutional alignment of her shoulders, the stance of a COO managing an event, had shifted into something more fundamental. She was not managing. She was following. "What do you need?" Rain drove sideways across the aft deck. The wind was steady at 25 knots, and the spray came over the gunwale in bursts that tasted of salt and diesel. Ansel worked in the red emergency light, building something none of them had ever seen built. He sent Riggs and Petra to the lazarette, the storage compartment below the aft deck, for canvas tarps and anchor chain. They came back soaked and carrying more weight than either of them had expected. The chain alone was 80 pounds. The canvas was stiff with salt and cold. Ansel laid the canvas flat on the deck. He cut it with a rigging knife from the emergency locker, 3 precise cuts that turned a flat rectangle into a shape that would become a cone when the water filled it. He attached heavy chain to the canvas corners using bowline knots, the same twist his hands made on mop handles, but here, at sea, in the rain, the motion was what it had always been meant to be. He reinforced the attachment points with rolling hitches, doubled back through the chain links, and rigged the tow line with a trucker's hitch, cinched so tight, the wet rope vibrated like a guitar string. Effie stood in the aft doorway, holding a waterproof flashlight that Petra had given her. The beam cut through the rain and found her father's hands. Simone stood behind Effie with her palm on the girl's shoulder, keeping her inside the threshold, out of the spray. "He used to do this every day," Effie said to Simone. She did not look away from her father. "Before I was born." Simone did not answer. She watched Ansel's hands tie the final knot, a movement so fast and certain it looked like a card trick, and felt something rearrange inside the architecture of what she believed about the people who worked in her building. The drogue went over the transom. The tow line pulled taut with a sound like a bowstring. The meridian groaned, a deep structural sound, the sound of a 200-foot vessel being asked to change its mind about the direction it was pointing. And slowly, over the course of 45 seconds that felt like 45 minutes, the bow came around into the waves. The beam on rolling that had threatened to capsize them eased into a steady fore and aft pitch. The deck stabilized. Effie stopped counting. The radio room was small and dark and smelled like burnt wiring. Ansel closed the door behind him and knelt in front of the VHF unit. The set was dead. It fed off the main electrical bus, and the main bus was slag. But the 12-volt emergency battery was on a separate circuit, mounted in a steel box below the chart table. Ansel opened the back panel of the VHF with a Phillips head screwdriver from the chart table drawer. The power regulator was a blackened rectangle the size of a postage stamp, fried when the bus surged. He bypassed it. He stripped cables from a cabin reading lamp, 16-gauge copper wire, 2 lengths, each about 16 inches, and wired the VHF directly to the 12-volt battery terminals, positive to positive, negative to chassis ground. The unit powered on. The display glowed green in the red dark. Channel 16, the international distress frequency, was selected, but the antenna mast, mounted on the radar arch above the wheelhouse, had sheared off in the wave. Without an antenna, the radio was a voice in a sealed room. He found a wire coat hanger in the captain's quarters closet. He straightened it against the edge of the chart table, bending out the curves with pliers until it was a single length of steel wire. He measured it against his forearm. The distance from wrist to elbow was approximately 20 inches, and he needed 19, approximately 48 centimeters. A quarter-wave dipole for channel 16's frequency of 156.8 megahertz. He cut it with the pliers. He stripped an alligator clip from the reading lamp's adjustable arm and used it to connect the wire to the antenna terminal on the back of the VHF. The signal meter twitched. Not strong, but present. Wallace appeared in the doorway. His shirt was untucked. His hair was wet and flat. His hands were shaking, not with cold, but with the particular tremor of a man whose authority has been removed from him by circumstances he cannot buy, sue, or fire. "You have no authority on this vessel." His voice was high and cracked in a way it had not been an hour ago, when he had been introducing Ansel to clients. "You are going to damage that equipment. Captain Riggs should be—" "Let him finish." Desmond K., standing behind Wallace in the passageway, his hand on Wallace's arm. His voice was the quietest it had been all evening, and it was the first time it had carried any weight. Wallace shook the hand off. His jaw worked, but he did not step forward. Ansel did not turn around. In the passageway behind Desmond, half visible in the red light, Effie stood with Barnacle pressed against her chest with both hands, watching her father work on a machine she did not understand in a room that smelled like rain and burnt circuits, and something she would later describe to her teacher as the way Papa's hands smell when he fixes things. Ansel keyed the mic. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is the motor vessel Meridian, 200 feet. Position approximately 11 nautical miles southeast of Peaked Hill Bar. We have lost all power. No propulsion. No navigation. 63 souls on board. Drifting toward the reef. Requesting immediate assistance. Over." He released the key. Static. Effie counted. She counted heartbeats, her own, which she could feel in her thumbs where they pressed against Barnacle's smooth back. She counted the drip of water from a cracked fitting above the chart table. 7 seconds. 12. 15. Riggs was gripping the edge of the chart table so hard his knuckles had gone the color of bone. Simone's hands were flat against the bulkhead behind her. Petra stood in the passageway with her arms crossed and her jaw set. 20 seconds. The static broke. A woman's voice, calm, procedural, unhurried, with the particular steadiness of someone trained to speak into chaos without absorbing it. "Motor Vessel Meridian, this is United States Coast Guard Sector Southeastern New England. We copy your mayday. Confirm your position and number of persons on board. Over." The room exhaled. It was not a cheer. It was not a sob. It was the sound a room makes when every person in it has been holding something they did not know they were holding, and they let it go at the same time, and the sound is too private and too communal to have a name. Ansel confirmed the position. He confirmed the number. 63 souls. They waited. The Coast Guard cutter was 40 minutes out. Ansel checked the sea anchor line on the aft deck. The rain had softened to a mist that hung in the air like gauze. The swells were still running, but the Meridian was riding them bow on now, steady, the drogue holding her nose into the weather the way a hand holds a frightened animal, firmly, gently, with the knowledge that the grip must not slip. Greta Holm came out to the aft deck. She stood beside Ansel at the transom rail and looked at the tow line where it disappeared into the black water. "My husband built ships," she said. "Holm Marine, Quincy. 40 years. She looked at Ansel's hands where they rested on the rail. "He would have wanted to shake your hand." Ansel did not say anything. He nodded once, and the nod contained everything that could not be said standing on the aft deck of a crippled yacht at 2 a.m. Gratitude and grief, and the particular ache of being recognized for something you had put away. Inside the salon, Effie was asleep on a banquette. Barnacle was tucked under her chin. His carved face pointed toward the ceiling. Petra had draped her catering jacket over the girl like a blanket. Simone sat in a chair 2 feet from the banquette, not touching Effie, not watching her directly, just present in the way a person is present when they have decided something fundamental about who they are willing to be. The red emergency lights made the salon look like the inside of something living. Lights on the horizon, white hull, orange stripe, floodlights turning the rain into silver. The Coast Guard cutter came alongside the Meridian and put a boarding team over the rail. 4 personnel in orange float coats, moving with the practiced economy of people who did this work in the dark. The senior petty officer spoke to Riggs, who pointed to Ansel. The petty officer walked to where Ansel stood near the aft rail. He looked at the drogue line running from the transom cleat into the water. He looked at the improvised antenna visible through the radio room window. He looked at Ansel. "Who rigged the sea anchor?" "I did." "And the radio?" "Yes." The petty officer studied the drogue configuration, the cone shape, the chain weight, the knot work. He crouched and ran his hand along the tow line where it was cleated. "That's a proper deepwater rig." He stood. "Where'd you serve?" "Merchant Marine. 8 years. Container ships. Supply boats." The petty officer nodded, the way one professional nods to another, not with surprise, but with recognition. Passengers began transferring to the cutter. They crossed in groups of 6, stepping over the rails with the unsteady legs of people who had spent the night in a world that would not hold still. Wallace Loxley walked past Ansel without speaking. His suit was wet and his hair was flat against his skull, and he did not look at anyone. He stepped over the rail and disappeared into the cutter's interior, and the space he had occupied on the deck of his own yacht closed behind him as quietly as a footnote. Desmond Kay paused near Ansel. He did not speak. He extended his hand. Ansel shook it. A brief, firm grip, the kind that says everything that both men knew did not need to be said. Desmond went over the rail. Simone Vellier was the last of the Loxley executives to leave the Meridian. She stopped in front of Ansel. The floodlights from the cutter were behind her, and her shadow fell across the deck between them. She did not say, "Thank you." "I should have listened to what I was looking at a long time ago." Ansel did not respond to that. There was nothing to add. He turned to the banquette where Effie was sitting up now, blinking in the floodlight that poured through the salon windows. Barnacle clutched against her chest with both hands. He picked her up. She put her head on his shoulder. Dawn came the color of pewter over the harbor. The Coast Guard cutter docked at the station pier, and 63 people walked down the gangway in gray wool blankets, moving with the slow, blinking gait of people who had been awake all night inside a thing they did not expect to survive. Petra Colvin found Ansel and Effie on the pier. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small packet of oyster crackers, the kind that came with chowder wrapped in cellophane, and held them out to Effie. "For Barnacle." Effie accepted them with the gravity of a person receiving a formal commendation. "He likes these," she said, though Barnacle had never been offered oyster crackers before in his life. Simone appeared at the edge of the pier. Her coat was damp and her hair was down, and she looked different from the woman who had stood at the edge of a circle of laughing people and said nothing. She told Ansel that her office number was on the building directory, 4th floor, that if he was ever looking for a different kind of work, he should use it. She did not touch him. She did not wait for an answer. She walked to a waiting car and got in and closed the door, and the car pulled away into the gray morning. Ansel carried Effie to his truck, a pickup with 192,000 miles, parked at the far end of the station lot beneath a streetlight that was still on. He set her in the passenger seat and buckled the belt. She took Barnacle out of her pocket and placed him on the dashboard, carefully, facing the water. Ansel sat in the driver's seat. He did not start the engine. He looked at the harbor. The storm had moved east and left behind a morning so still that the masts of the fishing boats in the inner harbor did not move. The water was flat and silver, and the sky was the color of the underside of a gull's wing. Effie put her hand on his arm, 2 fingers, the way she always held on. "I counted all the people on the boat," she said. 63. "Did you count yourself?" She thought about this. She looked at Barnacle on the dashboard, his carved face pointed toward the harbor, his one repaired flipper catching the first of the morning light. "I counted Barnacle, too." He started the truck.